Hey everybody, so today is going to be a doozy of a video. It's going to be all about the murder of Shanda Sharer. I was first introduced to this case indirectly by my favorite episode of Law & Order SVU, which is season 5, episode 17, entitled Mean, and this aired in 2004. I highly recommend watching that episode in addition to this video because I feel like that episode does a really good job of representing a fictionalized version of this case. In my opinion, really interesting. I'm gonna try to do my best to not look down at my notes too much in this video because I noticed in editing the last one it was really distracting. So strap yourselves in, this is going to be a bumpy ride. So Shanda Sharer was born on June 6th, 1979 in Pineville, Kentucky. She had an older sister named Paige and her parents were Stephen and Jacqueline. Her parents got a divorce when she was quite young. Her mother married and moved to Louisville. Shanda was a cheerleader in school. She also played volleyball and softball and she was the light of her mother's life. I highly recommend watching. I know recommending a Dr. Phil episode is kind of weird, but I recommend watching the Dr. Phil episode about this case because they interview her mom and her sister, and just hearing them talk in their own words about Shanda and how much they loved her is like so heartwarming and also heartbreaking. Her family loved her. She was fun and spunky and smart. Her mother got divorced again and the family moved to New Albany, Indiana. There her mother enrolled her in Hazelwood Middle School or junior high. I've seen it written both ways on various sources. Mother said that even though that she only lived 12 years, she lived those 12 years to the fullest. Which I think is super sweet. I wanted to go into a little bit of the backgrounds of the 4 perpetrators in this case because they're, especially Melinda Loveless, their backgrounds really do matter in this case. So Melinda Loveless was the youngest of 3 daughters. Her father, Larry, was a serial philanderer, which means he just had sex with a bunch of different people other than his wife. He was also reported to be physically, sexually, and emotionally abusive to both his wife and his daughters. Mother, Marjorie, was consistently suicidal. Her father was consistently in and out of work. He also didn't like to share his income even though the family was well off. He was very selfish with his money, to the point where a lot of family members would report that the girls would arrive at their houses hadn't eaten for days because they didn't have enough money to buy food. Her mother was incredibly sexually abused. She was frequently raped by her husband. Her father was accused of molesting both his daughters and one of his nieces. In 1990, a 14-year-old Melinda began dating another girl named Amanda Heverin, I think is how you say it. Melinda's father left the family and her mother remarried. Melinda started behaving erratically. She got in fights at school. She wasn't doing well in school. She went to a guidance counselor and complained of depression and suicidal thoughts and all that kind of stuff. She came out to her mother as a lesbian and her mother was initially furious about it but then later accepted it. Then we have Lori Tackett, whose mother was a Pentecostal Christian. Her father was a factory worker with 2 felony convictions. Lori claimed that she was molested at least twice due to the fact that her mother was a Pentecostal Christian, which basically one of the ideologies is that women need to adhere to traditionally female gender roles, meaning they can't wear pants. Lori was discovered to be changing into jeans at school and her mother found out about this and strangled her after a confrontation about this. After this, she began to self-harm and her parents put her into a hospital. 2 days after her release from the hospital, she self-harmed again and was put into a psychiatric ward where she was diagnosed as having borderline personality disorder and also disclosed that she had had hallucinations. Hope Rippey, I mean, she had divorced parents, but nothing completely out of the ordinary other than fights between her parents frequently. She started to self-harm as well. Tony Lawrence was the 4th and final perpetrator, and She was sexually abused by a male relative at the age of 9 and then raped by an older teenage boy at 14. And due to this, she started to self-harm and be promiscuous and started getting in fights in school. So that kind of covers the perpetrators. And so we're gonna go back to the months leading up to Shanda's murder. Amanda Heavrin met Shanda at Hazelwood Junior High. They met because they actually got into a fight, which caused them to get detention. They found common ground in detention and became friends. Over the next few months, they started exchanging love letters back and forth. This made Melinda Loveless jealous. In October 1991, Amanda and Shanda attended a school dance together. At this school dance, Melinda proceeded to confront them about their relationship. In October, Melinda threatened Shanda in public for stealing her girlfriend, allegedly. Melinda was sending Amanda letters to show her distaste for Amanda and Shanda's relationship. These letters were increasingly more and more threatening. Amanda then took these letters to what is called a youth prosecutor. Concerned about her well-being, her parents transferred her to the local Catholic school, thinking that she would be safer there. Tony, Hope, and Lori did not know Shanda at all. On the night of January 10th, 1992, Tony, age 15, Hope, age 15, Lori, age 17, drove Lori's car to Melinda's house. Melinda was 16 at the time. When they arrived at Melinda's home, she showed them a knife that she was going to scare Shanda with. Melinda noted that she disliked Shanda for being a copycat and stealing her girlfriend. Lori let Hope drive her car to Jeffersonville, which was where Shanda was staying with her father at the time. The girls arrived at Shanda's a bit before dark. Melinda instructed Hope and Tony to go up to the door and to introduce themselves as friends of Amanda in hopes of getting Shanda to come with them. They were hoping to lure her out of the house. They told her that they were going to go meet up with Amanda in a nearby abandoned home called the Witch's Castle. Shanda said she couldn't go while her parents were still awake. She told the girls to come back in a few hours. The girls crossed the Louisville River and attended a punk rock concert at a skate park. After they had picked Shanda up around 12:30 a.m., Hope began questioning her, more like interrogating her about Shanda's relationship with Amanda. They drove to an abandoned home in a town called Utica, known as the Witch's Castle. It had a whole bunch of urban legends attached to it, and it was just kind of a broken down, rundown home. When they took her inside the house, Shanda was sobbing, and they tied her arms and legs up with rope. They had lit a t-shirt on fire onto a stick, and they were scaring her with it, and they thought that would draw too much attention to themselves, so they decided to put the fire out and leave. Lori led them to a garbage dump in the woods, but Hope and Tony said that they were too scared, so they stayed in the car. Linda and Lori forced Shanda to strip completely naked, and they beat her first with their fists and then with a tire iron. This is kind of where it gets really, really graphic. So I apologize. This is going to be very difficult for me to tell you guys exactly what happened to her, but I do think it's really important to show the brutality that these teenage girls inflicted onto poor Shanda. So if you want to skip through this part, I will put up like a timestamp like right here if you don't want to hear like all the nitty-gritty little details. So they then forced her onto her knees, and Shanda had just had braces put on a couple of weeks before, and they had repeatedly slammed her face into her knee so her mouth would get all cut up on her braces. They tried to slit her throat, but the knife that they had was too dull. Hope and Tony were then instructed to come help hold her down so the other two could stab her repeatedly. Melinda and Lori proceeded to then put a rope around Shanda's neck and strangle her until she was unconscious. The girls placed Shanda into the trunk of the car, and they thought that she was dead. They then drove to Lori's nearby home to clean themselves up. Hear Shanda screaming from the trunk nearby, and they can hear the dog from next door barking at the noise of Shanda screaming. Lori grabbed a paring knife from the kitchen and went outside to, quote, deal with her. 8:30 a.m., Lori and Melinda decided to go joyriding. Tony and Hope stayed back at the house because they were tired and decided to take a nap. They kept hearing Shanda crying, and they decided to open the trunk. And she was completely covered in blood and wasn't able to speak. Lori took the tire iron that they had beat her with previously and brutally sodomized her with it, which made my stomach churn just uttering those words. They returned back to Lori's house to clean up again. Lori's mother yelled at her for being out so late and demanded that she take her friends home. They drove to the burn pile. Hope took a bottle of Windex that was in the trunk of the car and sprayed Shanda with it and used the phrase, "You're not looking so hot now, are you?" They drove to a gas station to fill up their car, and they also bought a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi that they poured out and filled with gasoline. They drove north to a field off Lemon Road. They wrapped Shanda in a blanket. Lori made Hope pour gasoline all over Shanda and light her on fire. Down the line, Shanda's mother was talking to the coroner, and the coroner had said that if she had not been set on fire, she would have recovered from her injuries. They confirmed that Shanda was dead. They drove to a McDonald's at 9:30 a.m. for breakfast, and it was joked that, this makes me sick, that the sausages that they were eating resembled Shanda's burned body. Shanda's body was discovered by 2 brothers that were in the area to hunt. Investigators initially had believed that this was a drug deal gone bad, but obviously they were very wrong. Shanda's father, Stephen, had reported his daughter missing. They filed a missing persons report almost immediately. At 8:20 p.m., dragged in by their parents, Hope and Tony gave very rambling confessions to the police, telling them everything that had just happened, and at that moment, dental records would positively ID Shanda's body. Lori and Melinda were arrested on January 12th, 1992. The prosecution immediately announced that they would try the girls as adults. Lori and Melinda were both sentenced to 60 years in the women's prison in Indianapolis. Lori Tackett was released in 2018, serving probation currently, and Melinda is scheduled for release in September of 2019. It's crazy to me that they're already out or soon to be out. Hope was sentenced to 45 years, with 15 years of those suspended for mitigating circumstances, which basically means that she was a model prisoner, which, if you've watched the episode of Dr. Phil, you will know that her mom was none too happy about this, which I don't blame her. Tony was allowed to plead guilty to criminal confinement and was sentenced to a maximum of 20 years. She was released on parole in 2000, and Hope was released on parole in 2006. Shanda's father, Stephen, unfortunately died of alcoholism 2005. He became very, very depressed after his daughter's disappearance and her murder, and he, quote, drank himself to death, which is so sad. Shanda's mother, Jacqueline, made her first contact with Melinda Loveless since the murder, though indirectly. Jacqueline worked with a company called the Indiana Canine Assistance Network, to a thing called Project to Heal, which basically trains dogs for the disabled. And she donated a dog named Angel to Melinda. Melinda, in prison, was a part of this organization, and she trained dogs for this organization, for these disabled people. Jacqueline vowed to donate a dog every single year in Shanda's honor. And this is a direct quote, Jacqueline. She got a lot of criticism for donating this dog to her daughter's killer, but she defended her choice by saying, quote, "It is my choice to make. Shanda's my child. If you don't let good things come from bad things, nothing gets better. And I know what my child would want. My child would want this." Which I think is incredibly touching. I think that's a great way to let your daughter's legacy live on. That is the murder of Shanda Cher. Really struck a chord with me for many reasons. People have a really hard time wrapping their head around the fact that 4 teenage girls murdered a 12-year-old. For all intents and purposes, didn't really do anything wrong. It is really sad to read about this case and to see all of the awful things that happened to her, and especially considering that her murderers are either out or very soon to be out of prison, and that I don't think that they paid their dues well enough for this brutal attack. I highly recommend, like I said, watching the Dr. Phil episode on this. You do get to see some interviews with the mother and the sister, as well as Hope and Lori, and hear things from their own words. It is really interesting, even though a lot of it I don't really, they try to make a lot of excuses for what they did, and I know myself and a lot of people watching that episode didn't really buy that, but it is fascinating to look at. So yeah, let me know any other cases you would like me to cover down in the comment section, and I hope you guys got something out of this. At least hope you find it interesting. I will hopefully talk to you guys in my next video. Mwah. Bye.